I grew up on a street where nothing ever happened. No car accidents, no fires, no police sirens cutting through the night. Just rows of identical houses, cracked driveways, and lawns that all tried a little too hard to look alive. Except for the one at the end. Everyone called it the house down the street, like giving it a real address would somehow make it stronger. It sat slightly apart from the others, not far enough to be isolated, but far enough that you noticed the gap. The grass around it never grew right. Not dead, exactly. Just thin, pale, like it didn't trust the soil beneath it. The windows were always dark, even when people lived there, and no one ever stayed long. When I was a kid, I thought it was just another creepy place adults warned you away from. The kind of house older kids dared you to touch, and parents pretended not to notice. But as I got older, I started to realize something was off. People didn't talk about the house like it was abandoned. They talked about it like it was occupied. Mrs. Hargreaves, who lived across the street, used to sit on her porch every evening, rocking back and forth with a mug she never drank from. Once, when I was walking home late, she called out to me. "Don't stand too close to it," she said, her eyes never leaving the house. "Close to what?" I asked. She smiled, thin and tight. "You'll know." Another time, I overheard my dad arguing with a neighbor about it. "They should have torn it down after the second family," the neighbor said. My dad shook his head. "After the first." I asked him what he meant later that night. He didn't answer, just told me to lock my window. For years, the stories came in pieces. A man who hung himself in the basement. A couple who disappeared without moving out. A woman found in the bathtub, water long gone but her skin still wrinkled. And beneath all of it, the quiet rumor no one ever said out loud. That the bodies were still there, buried under the house. I left town for college and didn't think about it much after that. Life got louder. Cities have a way of drowning out the things that whisper. But when I moved back years later, the house was still there. Same peeling paint, same dark windows, same sense that it was watching the street instead of sitting on it. The night I finally went inside wasn't planned. It was late, past midnight. The kind of quiet where every sound feels like a mistake. I'd been drinking, not enough to be reckless, just enough to feel brave in a way I didn't trust. I stood at the edge of my driveway and looked down the street. The house was darker than the rest, like it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Even the street lamp nearest to it flickered, buzzing softly, as if unsure whether it wanted to stay on. I don't remember deciding to walk toward it. I just remember noticing I was halfway there. The front door wasn't locked. That should have been my first warning. The air inside smelled wrong, not rot, not mold, something older, dry, like dust that had been breathing. When I stepped inside, the door closed behind me, not slammed, just finished closing. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could feel it, and somewhere beneath my feet, something shifted. I stood there for a second with my hand still hovering near the doorknob, like I could pretend I hadn't noticed the door closing on its own. The hallway was narrow. The wallpaper had that old floral pattern you only ever see in houses that smell like attic heat and stale carpets. But the walls weren't peeling the way you'd expect. They were intact. Too intact. It looked like someone had maintained the place just enough to keep it from collapsing, but not enough to make it feel lived in. Like it was being preserved for a reason. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on the floorboards and immediately caught something that made my stomach tighten. Scratches, not random, not wear and tear. Thin lines carved into the wood, leading forward in shallow arcs, like something heavy had been dragged across the floor again and again. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old enough to be forgotten either. And the strangest thing, they didn't start at the door. They started a few steps inside the hallway, like whatever had been dragged had begun after the door was closed. I took another step. The wood creaked under my foot, loud in the silence, and I froze again, waiting for something. A voice, a footstep, a warning. Nothing. I told myself it was just adrenaline, just that primal part of my brain lighting up, because I'd broken a rule I'd been taught since childhood. Don't go near the house. Don't look too long at it. Don't stand close to it. But I was here now, and leaving would mean admitting I'd been scared of stories. So I kept walking. The living room was to the left, an open doorway with no door attached. My flashlight swept over a couch that still had cushions, a coffee table with a ring stain where a mug must have sat for years. Everything looked staged, not tidy, but placed, like a set in a play where the actors had walked off mid-scene. There was a faint sound then, so faint I thought it was the street outside at first. A soft tapping. I turned the flashlight beam toward the far corner. The curtains were drawn, but not completely. A sliver of moonlight cut through the gap and landed on the wall. And in that thin stripe of light, I saw dust drifting. But not falling, moving sideways, like it was being pushed by a breath. The tapping happened again. I followed it with the light. The sound came from the ceiling. There was a pull cord hanging down, the kind you'd use to open an attic hatch, except the hatch was already open, just slightly, not wide, not enough for a person, just enough to reveal darkness above it. The pull cord swayed gently, like someone had touched it. My throat went dry. I didn't want to look up, but my body did it anyway, slow, reluctant, like it was trying to soften what I was about to see. The attic opening was a black mouth, and something inside it reflected my flashlight. 2 points of light, dull, pale, far back, not glowing like an animal, not shining like glass, more like the wet surface of an eye catching light. I stared, waiting for it to blink. It didn't. The tapping stopped. And then, from somewhere deeper in the house, something creaked. A different creak than floorboards. A long, slow hinge sound. A door opening. The sound carried from the back hallway, beyond the kitchen. I should have turned around right then. I know that. I remember thinking it. But the thought didn't stick. Because the house felt patient. Like it didn't care what I decided, because it had already decided for me. I moved toward the kitchen. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the air was thickening the further I went. The flashlight beam jittered slightly, my hand not as steady as I wanted it to be. The kitchen smelled like cold metal and old water. The sink was full, not with dishes, with dirt. A mound of soil sat in the basin, dark and packed like it had been scooped straight out of a grave. I stood there staring at it, confused in that blank way your mind gets when it sees something that doesn't belong. Then I noticed the faucet. It was dripping. Not water, something thicker. It fell slowly into the soil, sinking in without splashing. And with each drop, the dirt shifted, almost imperceptibly, like it was swelling, like it was alive. Behind me, the attic pull cord tapped once more against the ceiling. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the sink, because in the reflection of the kitchen window, black glass at this hour, I saw movement behind my shoulder, not a shadow, a shape, standing too close. I turned fast, flashlight swinging up, and the beam hit empty air. No one there. But the temperature dropped so suddenly, my breath puffed out white, in the middle of a house, in the middle of summer. I felt something then, something small and sharp, brush the back of my neck like fingers. I flinched so hard my phone almost slipped from my hand. The flashlight beam dragged across the wall and stopped. On writing, carved into the paint was something that had bitten deep, like a nail or a blade. The words were messy, uneven, but clear enough. Don't listen to them, they're still in the walls. My chest tightened. I read it twice, like the meaning would change. It didn't. The house was silent again, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full. I felt it pressing against my ears, like being underwater. Then the sound came again, not tapping, not creaking, a whisper, not words at first, just breath shaped into sound. It came from the vent above the stove, from inside the wall. I leaned in without thinking, like my body wanted proof. The whisper sharpened. A voice, thin and hoarse, like it hadn't spoken in years. And it said my name, not a question, not surprised, like it had been waiting to say it. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. "How do you—" I started, but the words died, because the whisper changed. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was several, layered on top of each other, some high, some low, some so faint they barely existed, and all of them were saying the same thing. "Go downstairs." The back hallway was darker than the rest, the flashlight beam seeming to shrink as it reached into it. The door at the end of the hall was open now, the one that led to the basement. I could see the top of the stairs, and the darkness below them looked thicker than shadow should. The voices whispered again in that chorus that made my skin crawl. "Go downstairs." I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. But my feet moved anyway. And as I stepped into the hallway, the attic pull cord stopped swaying, like whatever was up there had finally gone still. The stairs creaked under my weight before I even put my full foot down. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Old houses creak because the wood is loose, because it's tired. This creak sounded deliberate, like the stair was announcing me, like it wanted whatever was down there to know I was coming. I stood at the top for a moment, flashlight angled downward. The beam barely reached the bottom. The basement wasn't unfinished concrete like I expected. The walls were lined with wood panels, darkened with age, warped in places like they'd absorbed moisture for decades. Something about them felt soft, not physically, but visually. Like if I pressed my palm against the wall, it would give. I took another step, then another. Halfway down, the air changed again. It grew colder, but not evenly. Cold pockets drifted past my legs like invisible currents, brushing against me and moving on. I smelled earth. Not mildew, not rot, fresh soil, the kind you smell after digging. At the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight caught on something that made me stop dead. Footprints, bare footprints. They crossed the basement floor in several overlapping paths, pressed into a thin layer of dust and dirt. Some were large, some small. Some looked wrong, too long. Toes stretched out like they'd been dragged instead of lifted. None of them led back to the stairs. I stepped onto the basement floor, my shoe landing between two prints. The sound followed immediately. A soft, wet thud, like something heavy settling. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The basement was larger than I thought. The beam revealed old shelves along the walls, most of them empty, a few holding rusted tools and glass jars clouded so badly I couldn't see what was inside. Then the light swept across the far wall and stopped. There was a section where the wood paneling didn't quite line up. A rectangle, slightly darker than the surrounding boards, the edges rough. A sealed door, not a proper one. No handle, no hinges. Just planks nailed over something that used to open. The whisper came again, closer this time. Not from the walls, from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing, but the air behind me felt disturbed, like someone had just passed through it. I turned back to the sealed door. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I didn't want to go near it. Everything in me screamed not to. But my legs carried me forward, slow and stiff, like they weren't fully mine anymore. The closer I got, the louder the whisper became. Not words, crying. Low, muffled sobs, like someone trying not to be heard. I stopped a few feet away. "Hello?" I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to keep it steady. The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt sharp, like pressure building. Then came a knock. From the other side of the sealed boards. One knock. Careful. Controlled. My mouth went dry. I swallowed. I'm just looking around. The words felt stupid the moment they left my mouth. Another knock. Two this time. Closer together. The wood vibrated faintly. Something shifted behind it. I saw dust trickle down from the seams between the planks. My flashlight beam caught movement through a gap no wider than a finger. Skin. Pale. Tight. Pressed up against the crack, stretching it just enough for something behind it to breathe. And then an eye appeared. Not fully, just part of it. A cloudy iris peered through the gap, rolling slightly, searching. I staggered back. The knocking stopped. The whisper returned, louder now, layered again with multiple voices. Not telling me to go downstairs anymore, telling me something else. This is where they kept us. The temperature dropped again, so fast it felt like a punch. The sealed door shuddered once, hard. I jumped back as dust rained down. The eye vanished. The crying came back, louder, frantic now, mixed with scratching, dozens of nails dragging across wood from the inside. I backed away, shaking my head. No, no, no. The scratching stopped all at once. I stood there panting, my breath fogging the air. Then something touched my ankle. I screamed and kicked out on instinct. My foot connected with nothing. But when I looked down, the flashlight beam caught on handprints forming in the dust around my shoes. Small ones, pressing up from below, from under the floor. The wood beneath my feet creaked. Deep, strained, like it wasn't meant to hold weight anymore. And then I heard it. A sound I hadn't noticed before because it was constant. Faint. Rhythmic. Breathing. Coming from the walls. Not one set of lungs. Many. I backed toward the stairs, every step slow and careful, terrified the floor would give way and drop me into whatever was beneath. The whisper followed me. "They buried us here." My heel hit the first step, then the second. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back at the sealed door. I climbed. Halfway up, the basement light flickered on by itself. I froze, staring down. The room was fully lit now, harsh white bulbs buzzing overhead. And in that light, I saw the truth. The footprints weren't in dirt. They were in ash. The shelves weren't empty. They were lined with urns, hundreds of them. each one marked with a name scratched into the metal. Some dates were old, some were recent, and every single urn had been disturbed. The lids were off. Whatever had been inside them wasn't anymore. The lights cut out. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was back outside, gasping, stumbling across the overgrown lawn like the house might reach out and grab me by the ankles. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it watching me. The streetlights flickered as I crossed the road, each one buzzing louder as I passed beneath it. When I finally reached my house, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting the door open. I slammed it shut and locked every bolt. Only then did I let myself breathe. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening. No footsteps, no whispers, no crying, just the low hum of my fridge and the distant sound of a car passing somewhere down the street. I told myself it was over, that I'd gone somewhere I shouldn't have, let my imagination run wild, scared myself stupid in a house with a bad reputation and a lot of rot. I showered longer than usual that night, scrubbing at my skin like I could wash the feeling off. When I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion hit me all at once. I slept. That was my first mistake. I woke up to the sound of digging. At first, I thought it was a dream, something half-formed, mixed with sleep. But the sound didn't fade. It stayed steady, rhythmic, scrape, thud, scrape. It was coming from outside. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. The street outside my window was dark, the same as always. But when I pulled the curtain back, my stomach dropped. The house across the road was lit, not from inside, from the ground. Floodlights, bright, white, industrial, had been set up in the front yard, casting harsh shadows across the broken windows and peeling walls. And there were people out there, at least 4 of them. They moved slowly, methodically, shovels biting into the earth right where the front lawn sloped downward. Right where I'd stood earlier that night. They weren't dressed like construction workers, no logos, no safety gear, just dark clothes and gloves. One of them straightened and looked directly at my window. Even from this distance, I knew he was smiling. I stepped back, heart pounding. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification. Unknown sender. A single message. You shouldn't have gone inside alone. Another buzz. They don't like being remembered without permission. My hands trembled as I typed back. Who is this? The reply came instantly. Someone who's been trying to dig them up for years. I watched as one of the figures knelt and brushed dirt away from something solid. A shape emerged. Wood, the outline unmistakable. A coffin. The man at my window raised his hand and waved, slowly, mockingly. Another message appeared. The house isn't haunted. It's full. I dropped the phone. When I looked back out the window, the lights were gone. The yard was empty. No holes, no disturbed earth. The house across the street sat dark and silent again, exactly the way it always had. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came in pieces. Coffee that tasted like ash. Sunlight that felt too bright. The sound of birds that made everything feel wrong. I called in sick to work. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. 2 officers stood on my porch. They asked me if I'd noticed anything unusual the night before. I told them the truth, or at least part of it, that I'd gone into the house, that something felt wrong, that I'd seen people digging. They exchanged a look. One of them sighed. "You're not the first person to say that," he said. "But there's nothing there." I asked them about the urns, about the basement, about the sealed door. The older officer's expression tightened. "There's no basement," he said. "Not anymore." He explained that decades ago, during renovations, they'd filled it in after an inspection found irregularities, unmarked remains, dozens of them. Officially, it was written off as a historical burial site, disturbed during early construction. Unofficially, no one wanted to look too closely. The house had been boarded up soon after. No charges, no names, no records. Before they left, the younger officer hesitated. "People who go in there," he said quietly, "they don't usually come back the same." After they drove off, I stood in my doorway for a long time, staring at the house across the street. That night, I heard digging again, but this time it wasn't outside. It was beneath my floor, scraping, thudding, moving closer. I sold my house 3 weeks later, moved across town, changed my number. I still hear it sometimes when everything is quiet, digging, and when I close my eyes, I can still see the urns, open, empty, waiting. The people who bought my old house didn't last long. I know this because, even after everything, I still checked. Curiosity is a sickness. Once it starts, it doesn't go away. 3 months after I moved, the listing went back up. Same photos, same bland description. Quiet street, great potential. No mention of the house across the road, no mention of the history, no mention of the ground. I drove past once, just once. The new owners had put up a fence, tall, wooden, freshly painted. It boxed in their front yard like a boundary line between them and something else, between them and the house. The windows across the street were boarded up again, tighter than before. Thicker wood, longer screws. Someone had learned. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The first dream came a week later. I was standing in my new living room, barefoot on cold tile. The lights were off, but I could see clearly. The floor beneath me was soft, like damp soil. When I looked down, my feet were sinking slowly, leaving impressions that filled themselves in as soon as I lifted them. I tried to move. I couldn't. Something beneath the floor knocked once, twice. Then the whispering started, not voices, breathing, dozens of shallow, panicked breaths rising up through the ground, through the walls, through my chest. I woke up screaming. The dreams kept coming, always the same rhythm. Dig, pause, listen. Sometimes I'd hear my name. Sometimes I'd hear nothing at all, which was worse. I started sleeping with the lights on, then the TV, then not at all. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A knock, not on my door. From inside the walls, 3 slow taps, exactly like the ones on the basement door. I stood there, frozen, staring at the plaster as if it might split open. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown sender. You moved. Another message followed. That doesn't mean you left. I typed back before I could stop myself. What do you want from me? The typing bubble appeared immediately, then stopped, then appeared again. You saw them. That's enough. I asked who they were. The reply came slower this time. People who were buried without being gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found dirt on my kitchen floor. Dark, damp clumps pressed into the grout lines like footprints. They led to the bedroom and stopped beside my bed. That's when I realized the truth. The house wasn't the problem. The land wasn't either. It was memory, attention. Once you acknowledged them, once you stood above them and felt their presence, you became part of the site. A marker, something they could follow. I don't hear digging anymore, not like before. Now it's quieter, closer, Sometimes it feels like something shifting just beneath my skin, like a sensation I can't scratch away. If you're listening to this and there's a house on your street that no one talks about, one with boarded windows, one where the ground looks wrong, one where people say nothing happened, don't go inside, don't stand in the yard, and whatever you do, don't look down, because once they know you remember them, they don't need to dig anymore. If you made it this far, you already know what kind of stories live here. Subscribe to Buried Awake for more true-feeling horror, unsettling narratives, and stories that follow you long after the lights go out. Sleep well.